It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A blackout hits millions across Spain and Portugal, with flights, traffic lights, trains and phone networks all affected. Authorities blame a rare atmospheric phenomenon for the outage. We'll have the latest from Madrid as the authorities and travellers across Europe deal with the chaos. Also tonight, a 51st State of Mind will be live in Canada, awaiting the results of an election dominated by Donald Trump's desire, repeated today, to take control of the country. Better news, though, for the UK, as the White House said tonight trade talks are going positively, but the Prime Minister faces pressure on the campaign trail over migration figures. Vladimir Putin declares a 3-day ceasefire to mark the 80th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany, as Donald Trump pushes for an immediate deal. Victims' families call for a change in the law for young drivers after a teenager is given a 2-year sentence for causing death by careless driving. Plus, the BBC chairman says powerful individuals are making life unbearable at the BBC, but the corporation is cleared of having a toxic culture. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Authorities across Spain and Portugal are tonight scrambling to restore power to large areas of their countries after one of the biggest power outages in recent history. A cyber attack has been ruled out as the cause, with engineers instead blaming what has been called a rare atmospheric phenomenon that could take days to fully resolve. Ashna Haranag sent this report from Madrid.
Carnage in Spain's capital. No traffic lights at this roundabout makes for an almost lawless scene as cars and pedestrians navigate the disorder. It's a picture replicated across the country and in Portugal too. Both nations entirely cut off from power. As the train network grounded to a halt, some stranded passengers in Valencia walked the rest of their journeys. Railway lines deserted and phone lines dead. By lunchtime, office workers poured onto the streets, dazed and disconnected.
We were working very well. Suddenly the computer went down. We thought it was a normal blackout, as it happens sometimes, but then we heard it was a cyber attack. This was through information through the poor connection we had to the internet. After that, we stopped having any comms, no access to the internet, nothing.
And then came the official announcements. Travel is only advised if necessary.
State security forces have increased their presence and vigilance on the streets and roads, but for the moment, no civil protection has been observed. As for railway traffic, it has stopped, as you know, for the safety of passengers.
Passengers wanting to travel in and out of the countries are desperate for movement that's simply not happening. Flights in and out are severely delayed or cancelled. Madrid and Barcelona airports are running off contingency generators. There are queues everywhere you look for taxis, staff desks and check-in. People are desperate for information. The dropout blamed on Spain's electricity grid. Portuguese grid officials say due to extreme temperature variations in the interior of Spain, there were anomalous oscillations in the very high voltage lines, a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration. It's estimated that full normalisation of the network could take up to a week. 2 countries thrown into darkness, and the cause is still unknown. Ashna Haranag, Sky News in Madrid.
So what exactly happened? Our science and technology editor Tom Clark is here with me in the studio. The answer to that is we don't know exactly, but so far, what explanations are being offered up?
Well, we've had this one from the Portuguese grid operator saying this induced atmospheric vibration. That's got a few people scratching their heads because that does happen. It's recognised in power lines. If you have certain temperature fluctuations, sometimes winds, you can get odd vibrations or changes in the conductivity of power lines. That upsets the frequency of the power running through them. You know how they hum when you listen to them? That's the frequency of the AC current. That could cause a power line to go down, but it's unlikely to precipitate a grid collapse as vast as this one. You can see on this chart, this was power consumption on the Spanish grid at 12:30 there, it just drops more than half of the power being supplied to the grid. So we can assume that's half of the power grid going offline, gradually building back up. That was at 6:15 this evening. It's now returned quite a bit higher, but it's still well below the sort of peak demand they usually get about 10 at night, like we do here in the UK. So they're still struggling to put it back together. You know, a power line can go down, but you've got resilience usually in your grid. So other things must have gone wrong here, and we don't yet know what those could have been. But it obviously is raising big questions about resilience of the grid, because it's very clear from the scale of disruption we're seeing how reliant we are on these sorts of power systems. And the questions that raises, I mean, one thing that will definitely be in there, although a lot of the sort of anti-net zero, a lot of people are piling in saying, you know, could it be the amount of renewables? But it's true, today Spain was relying on about 60% of its electricity was coming from solar power. Not very much, only 3.5% from gas turbines. Typically, it's turbines, things with inertia that grid operators use to get grids back up and running. Could that have been a factor? It's far too early to have any sight on whether it could have been. But as we transition to more renewables on grids, it's certainly something people will be looking at, because it's something we're pursuing very aggressively here in the UK. So lots of questions they'll be looking at. But I think the important thing to remember, and we're hearing this from Spain and we're now seeing it, it takes a long time to put these grids back on. They go off instantly, but building them back up, they've got to balance demand and supply very, very carefully. And that means putting small bits of the grid back on slowly, hoping it doesn't trip, then moving on to the next one. And that can take hours, sometimes days.
Yeah, that is the certainty that it will take some time. Tom, thank you very much for the moment. Now, Canadians have been voting in a federal election, overshadowed by Donald Trump's threats to the country's sovereignty and fears over his escalating trade war. Mr. Trump has implemented tariffs on Canada and repeatedly called for it to become the 51st state of the United States, something he said again today. Little wonder, then, that the election is being described as a referendum on Canada-US relations. Well, the two front-runners are the Liberal Party, led by former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and the Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre. James Matthews joins us now from Ottawa. What are the polls telling us, James?
Well, the polls are telling us that the man who used to be the Bank of England Governor is going to be Canadian Prime Minister. He currently is in that position, of course, Mark Carney, who called a snap election. And the polls show that he's ahead, albeit more narrowly than he has been. But he leads a Liberal Party that was dead and buried not 3 months ago. What changed the game was Donald Trump being elected, imposing tariffs on Canada, saying that his ambition was to annex Canada as the 51st state. That has triggered a patriotism, a nationalism amongst Canadians, and they have given their vote and their support to Mark Carney more than the Conservative, who was way out in front. But Carney is seen as the anti-Trump, whilst the Conservative Pierre Poilievre is seen as the mini-Trump. That's the way that Carney has styled it. So the man who, you know, the reassuringly grey financial expert who ran the Bank of England, who has been through the 2008 financial crash, Brexit, he has earned the trust of Canadians, according to the polls, as the man to take on Donald Trump. I am standing in the press gallery, the foyer of Canada's House of Commons, Gillian, and you get a sense of the kind of history of this place. It dates back to 1859, portraits of Canadian Prime Ministers through the years. Sir Wilfrid Laurier, the first French-Canadian Prime Minister, and there Louis Saint Laurent to the left, and next to him William Mackenzie King. So, and beyond those double doors with the Canadian flags, that's where the House of Commons resides for now. Empty, of course, as Canadians go to the polls with much on their mind, but perhaps nothing more than Donald Trump, who has entered the fray again on polling day, posting on Truth Social, telling Canadians to vote for the man, effectively, who would make Canada the 51st state. And of course, the two main contenders in Canada, they're falling over themselves to put distance between Trump. The Conservative candidates saying, look, Canada will never be the 51st state. He sees the danger in being ideologically aligned to Donald Trump in his politics. That's caused him a problem, and that has contributed to the situation we have right now, where Mark Carney is the racing favourite. Polls due to close in about 4 hours' time, Gillian, and of course results expected through the night.
James, thank you so much. And of course, we'll have full coverage of those election results overnight here on Sky News. Well, compared with the bad feeling we've just heard about, there was better news for Downing Street tonight after the White House press secretary said that good progress was being made towards a trade deal between the US and the UK.
As for the trade talks, I understand they are moving in a very positive way with the United Kingdom. I don't want to get ahead of the president or our trade team and how those negotiations are going, but I have heard they've been very positive and productive with the United Kingdom. And I will say the president always, both publicly and privately, speaks incredibly highly of your country. He has a good relationship with your prime minister, though they disagree on domestic policy issues. I've witnessed the camaraderie between them firsthand in the Oval Office, and there is a deep mutual respect between our two countries that certainly the president upholds.
Today, Sir Keir Starmer was out on the campaign trail in the northwest of England, making a late pitch to voters ahead of Thursday's local elections. But it wasn't international relations causing him difficulties. Instead, he faced questions about trust and his record on tackling the number of people making channel crossings in small boats, expected tomorrow to hit 10,000 so far this year. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby, in the latest of our reports on the fortunes of the parties in the run-up to polling day.
Arriving in the northwest for the final few days of campaigning ahead of elections on Thursday that could prove very consequential for our politics. So it's a big set of elections this week. We've got local elections, mayoral elections and the Runcorn by-election. That is a big Labour-held seat. Keir Starmer's Labour won the landslide back in July in the general election, but since then they have been sliding in the polls. This is the first big test to see if voters will press the change button again, and this time on Starmer's government, with Reform and Nigel Farage snapping at their heels. The PM visiting a health centre in Lancashire to announce the first freeze on prescription charges in 3 years in the hope it will win over voters. But today, the Prime Minister ambushed by pro-Palestinian protesters in footage we didn't see until after the event. The heckling a nod to wider disquiet. Prime Minister, it's the first big ballot box test for you since the general election when you won that landslide on the change message. But this Thursday could be pretty different. Your polling is bad. You're on the ropes at the Runcorn by-election. You're not the change?
We've got a really positive case to put to the electorate at the elections this Thursday. Of course, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be tough.
The immigration record of your government is shocking. The number of illegal migrants crossing the channel in small boats is set to pass 10,000. And Reform are going to absolutely smash you up on it, aren't they?
The last government lost control of our borders. We have to now take the necessary steps. But also what we've done is to put an intense focus on removing people who've no right to be in this country.
Are you more worried about Reform than the Conservatives?
At the end of the day, Reform and the Tories, there's all this talk about them getting together and merging. I mean, if you're a Tory voter who doesn't want a pro-Russia foreign policy, how does a merger with Reform work for you? Both sets of voters are being conned.
A PM as concerned about Reform as his old adversaries, the Conservatives, in a set of elections where the smaller parties are tipped to thrive. This, a flying visit to the northwest. We caught up with him again on his way back to London. You said there just now about voters feeling conned by Reform and the Conservatives, but when I think about the last election, they voted for change, they chose you, and now they're feeling conned by you.
Look at the change that we offered. We said we would change the NHS by fixing it and making it fit for the future. Well, we're getting on with that. We're making that change.
The person you started talking about was Nigel Farage. You're really competitive. Do you hate the thought of losing to him?
I hate the thought of losing to anyone. You know that, whether that's politics or anything else.
Runcorn by-election, do you think you're going to lose
tough.
it?
It's going to be tough.
A third of voters in England eligible to cast their ballots on Thursday, and politicians will be crisscrossing the country all week to win support. The elections are more than just about the ups and downs of individual leaders. It will also give us a sense about whether the two-party system battered in the general election really is on its last legs. The vast majority of council seats up for grabs this time around are Conservative held, but eyes very much on the PM too, with voters seemingly losing faith that he is the change. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Well, earlier we heard Ashna Huranag's report on the latest in those power outages in Spain and in Madrid. Communications have been difficult, as you might expect, but we can now speak to Ashna live from Madrid airport. Already the newspaper headlines tomorrow will be saying that Spain declares a state of emergency. Ashna, what's the situation that you find?
I think that sums up the state of emergency, the fact that we're not able to get communications with you guys, and that's the same for the hundreds and thousands of people that are in this country tonight and trying desperately to get out of the country if they can, if they have holidays booked, but also to move around it. Madrid airport is running on contingency generators. That's the only way we've managed to find a slither of 4G to bring it to you now. There are lights on here, but if you can imagine, the whole surrounding area of Madrid airport has been plunged into darkness. We're now entering some 12 hours, approaching 12 hours since that electricity became cut off, not only isolating Spain, but isolating Portugal too, whose electricity supply solely depends on Spain. What you might be able to see behind me, it may have cleared a bit now, but this is the queue for the local buses. But just over the other side, we daren't move the camera because it could well break off the signal, but there are just snaking giant queues of hundreds of people waiting for very, very few taxis. The taxis aren't wanting to come because they've run out of contactless payments on their machines, which they're not able to charge up. And they're also having a bit of a limit when it comes to filling up at the fuel station. Whether it's fuel stations, restaurants, shops, ATM machines, the entire country has effectively shut down. Parts of northern Spain have managed to get some help from France, and the southern parts, we understand, have been helped in parts by Morocco. But largely, the question is how on earth this has happened, and crucially, when it's going to get up and running again.
Ashna, thank you very much for that update. Vladimir Putin has announced Russian forces will hold a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine to coincide with next week's 80th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany from the 8th to the 10th of May. The Ukrainians responded with scepticism, saying that Russia should announce a ceasefire for 30 days, not just for a parade. Here's our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark.
President Putin sprung a bit of a surprise today when he announced unilaterally a 72-hour, 3-day pause in the fighting that would span the 9th of May, which is Victory Day in Russia, a very important day symbolically, the Victory in Europe Day for Russia. May the 8th is the Victory in Europe Day for the rest of us. And in doing that, he's offering far less than the Americans will have wanted. The United States was very keen to get an all-out ceasefire indefinitely so that talking could start. And this is rather less than that. It offers the Americans something, not this week when the Americans wanted it, but next week, 72 hours, you just unilaterally announced. And it's far less, of course, than the Ukrainians offered almost 7 weeks ago now, when they said a complete unconditional ceasefire, ground, sea and air, from now on, and then we'll talk. So it's less than the Ukrainians offered, far less than the Americans wanted immediately. But presumably, the calculation that Putin is making is that it will be enough to keep the Americans involved, keep the Americans along with the narrative that the Russians have been able to create so far, that this war is all about deeper issues, not just Ukraine, and those deeper issues have got to be addressed, and that Zelensky is the problem, not Zelensky is the victim. I think that's where we are with that. But why now? Why is this particular moment so important? I think it goes back to this meeting in the Vatican. Here we are in St. Peter's Basilica. And the two leaders, Trump and Zelensky, sat together for a quarter of an hour. As diplomatic meetings go, this is about as intimate as it gets. Diplomatic leaders never normally get this close to each other or speak as intimately as they seem to have spoken together. What they said, we don't really know, but undoubtedly, President Zelensky was able to convince President Trump at least of the game that he believes that the Russians are playing. And after this meeting, Trump was visibly more irritated with Putin and has issued a couple of very strong, so far only rhetorical, but strong denunciations of Putin's apparent desire to keep the war going. And so this meeting, I don't think it will change American policy, but it may well have affected the way American policy is carried out. And for America, this is a really important week. For the United States, this is the 100-day anniversary in a couple of days' time of President Trump's acquisition of power, and that really matters to him, to have something important and big to announce, not just a 3-day ceasefire next week, announced unilaterally by the Russians.
A teenager who killed 3 of his passengers and left 2 young children and their stepmother with life-changing injuries has been sentenced to 2 years detention for causing death by careless driving. The mothers of 2 of the young people killed have told Sky News the government must now introduce greater restrictions on newly qualified drivers. They've been speaking to Sky's Dan Whitehead.
Just a bright, happy, funny spark. You know, she was blossoming into a beautiful young lady.
He'd grown into such a beautiful, funny, loving, kind young man. You know, he had such a kind heart.
Tilly Seckham and Harry Purcell were just 16 and 17 when they were killed. Passengers in a car travelling too fast, driven by a teenager who'd just passed his test.
It's devastating. You know, the birthdays, the anniversaries, everything, you know, and just being a mother, you know, you feel lost when you've lost one of your children.
There's a lot of things that we do as a family now that are incredibly hard because Harry has left a massive hole in our family.
Tilly, Harry and 16-year-old Frank Wormold all died when the car they were in, driven by 17-year-old Edward Spencer, lost control on a country road in Warwickshire.
Edward Spencer had passed his driving test just 5 weeks before he made a journey on this stretch of road. He was travelling at around 64 miles per hour when he lost control. Too fast, say police, for the conditions.
He crashed his Fiesta into an oncoming Fiat 500, seriously injuring 2 primary school children and their stepmum inside. She told Sky News of the moment it happened.
I was on a straight strip of road and I saw a silver Ford Fiesta coming towards me round the corner, and I could tell that the driver had lost control, and I knew it was going to hit my car, and the only thing I could do was tell my children to close their eyes because I knew they were going to die.
All 3 did survive, but their recovery continues. As Spencer is sentenced, yet again there are broken families, all asking the government to reconsider introducing tougher rules for new drivers. Graduated driving licences, successful in countries like Canada and Australia, see restrictions like a ban on driving at night and a limit on passenger numbers.
If graduated driving licences were in place, you know, this would have saved Tilly's life. What I'm saying is if you're not willing to go down the graduated driving licences route, no action and procrastination is not good enough anymore.
We're penalised because our son's been killed. You know, you can look at it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You know, our son is no longer here because somebody was driving without due care and attention.
Sentencing Spencer, the judge described the carnage he had caused, telling him he was a habitual bad driver, showing off and going too fast. In an unusual intervention, he said this horrific situation might have been avoided if young drivers had limits on passenger numbers.
Yet more pressure on the government that refuses to consider graduated driving licences, but says it is determined to tackle the problem of young deaths on our roads. Too late for 3 families who've lost their children. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
A 15-year-old boy has admitted killing another teenager at a school in Sheffield. Harvey Wilgoose, who was also 15, died after being stabbed with a hunting knife in February. The teenage boy, who cannot be named for legal reasons, admitted to Harvey's manslaughter but has denied murder. He will go on trial in the summer. The International Court of Justice has heard testimony that Israel has been starving, killing and displacing the people of Gaza, whilst also targeting aid workers. The allegations came on the opening day of a hearing into claims of Israel breaching international law during the war against Hamas. Israel has consistently denied it has deliberately targeted civilians or aid workers in Gaza and is not attending the hearing in The Hague. The Vatican has announced the conclave to elect the successor to Pope Francis. That will begin on the 7th of May. 135 cardinals who are under the age of 80 will take part in electing the new pontiff. The event will be held in the Sistine Chapel, with secret ballots taking place until a decision is made. The BBC chairman has told staff a small number of powerful individuals are making the lives of colleagues unbearable. But an independent review into staff behaviour found no evidence of a toxic culture at the broadcaster. Sky's arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, has more. And just to warn you, there is some strong language in her report.
It's often cited as being the envy of the world, seen as a gold standard public service broadcaster. But are the BBC staff able to call out the bad behaviour of some of its stars? In the wake of ex-newsreader Hugh Edwards pleading guilty to accessing child abuse images, the findings of a deep dive review into workplace culture now published. Quoting employees who point out the pay differential is huge, how empowered really is a producer to raise and address issues, and how the current process of reporting is in itself traumatising, unsupportive, overly long, with relentless rounds of meetings and uncertainty. The report ultimately finding no evidence of a toxic culture, but still tough talking from its chair, Samir Shah.
Everyone who cares about the BBC has felt deeply shocked and upset by the cases we have all now seen and heard about. And that many of us have an absolute determination to take decisive action and rid the BBC of these behaviours for good.
Something which the BBC has struggled with to date. Earlier this year, a review found a number of staff felt unable to raise concerns about Russell Brand's behaviour when he was a radio presenter for them. In January, the board also apologised after another review found the corporation didn't take adequate action over questionable behaviour from DJ Tim Westwood, both of whom deny any wrongdoing.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
If the recommendations sound familiar, similar was said after Jimmy Savile's abuse was exposed when in 2013 the corporation published its Respect at Work review. This new 2025 report talks of a Call It Out campaign for bad behaviour, which is not too dissimilar to its 2013 promise to publicise support for bullying. It also says it'll implement new pledges for individuals on what they can expect from the BBC, which again sounds rather like back when they promised to relaunch the BBC's values. Tough talking from the big bosses in there, but it's pretty damning that almost a decade later these are still issues that it's struggling with. The report asks whether employees who in the last 20 to 30 years have reached senior positions understand the difference between banter and what is downright cruel or offensive.
In 2003, when I was working with Greg Dyke on the BBC's values, and forgive my language here, but we identified a group of people called BAFTA bastards, which meant that they were people who won awards and they were amazing and brilliant, but were total nightmares to work with. And we did at that time try to tackle it. And clearly we weren't successful enough.
While it is a minority, the BBC admits there are still places where powerful individuals on and off screen can abuse that power, making life for their colleagues unbearable. One of its biggest challenges is enabling those people to feel confident about speaking up. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by The Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Sabey, and The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Quirrell. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Guardian. Its headline, Spain declares state of emergency after power blackout causes chaos. We'll be right back with that and other stories. Do stay with us.